The wind howled through the empty plains like a ghost that couldn't rest. The sky was bruised purple, promising another storm, and the land, what was left of it, cracked beneath the weight of hunger and loss. Somewhere on the edge of that desolate horizon, a woman stumbled forward with two small children clinging to her skirt. Her lips were dry, her hands trembling. When she reached the fence of a stranger's ranch, she didn't knock on the door right away. She prayed first, silently, desperately. Then she whispered, almost too softly for the world to hear, "We haven't eaten in 5 days." That was the moment everything began to change. The door creaked open, and a tall man stood there. His face was roughened by the sun, his eyes hollow from more than just hard labor. He wasn't a hero, not in the way stories usually tell it. He was just a man who'd lost too much and learned not to expect anything from life anymore. But when he looked at that woman and her starving children, something broke open in him that had been closed for years. Without a word, he reached behind him, tore a half loaf of bread in two, and pressed it into her hands. Then, with a strange quiet in his voice, he said, "You can have the rest of it. And, my name, if you'll take it." She didn't understand what he meant, not then. But she took the bread, and destiny with it. The ranch was nearly dead, just like its owner. Caleb Hart had inherited it from his father, along with debts no drought could pay off. He'd been alone since the fever took his wife 2 winters ago, and he had stopped praying long before the widow appeared. The land used to hum with life, cattle, wheat, the laughter of family, but now it was just him and the ghosts. He didn't know why he offered his last food to a stranger. Maybe because she looked like someone who'd once believed the world was kind. Her name was Eliza. The storm had taken her husband's life, the drought had taken their crops, and hunger had taken everything else. When Caleb opened his door, she saw not a savior, but a weary soul like her own. The children, Liam and Mary, ate that night, slowly, as though afraid the bread would vanish if they moved too quickly. Caleb watched them, the flickering firelight catching in their hollow faces, and he felt a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not pity, but remembrance. When Eliza tried to thank him, her voice broke. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "It was all you had." Caleb only shrugged. "Wasn't much of a life, holding on to nothing," he replied. "You all can stay here till morning. Storm'll be bad." But morning came with more than just light. It came with purpose. Eliza found herself sweeping the floor, gathering wood, fixing what she could. The children's laughter, thin and fragile, returned like the first notes of a forgotten song. And Caleb, for the first time in years, worked the fields with someone watching. Days passed into weeks. Hunger turned to routine, and routine to quiet companionship. Yet the ghost of loss still lingered, hers and his. Caleb had buried a woman he loved. Eliza had buried hope itself. Neither thought they could love again. But love, in its quiet way, doesn't ask for permission. It just grows. The second chapter of their story began the morning Caleb found Eliza out by the well, crying. She was holding a letter, a notice from the town, declaring her land sold and her home repossessed. Everything she had left in this world, gone. He stood beside her in silence for a long time before finally saying, "You could stay. Not just for a night." She turned to him, eyes red but burning with pride. "I can't live off your kindness forever." He smiled faintly. "Then don't. Live with me instead." At first, she thought he was joking. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity, not pity. He wasn't offering rescue, he was offering a new beginning. Still, she shook her head. "I can't give you what you lost." Caleb looked toward the horizon. "I'm not asking for what I lost. I'm asking for what's still here." And so, with trembling hands and hearts heavy from the past, they built something new. Not out of passion or promises, but out of survival, grace, and shared pain. Together, they planted seeds again, literal ones and the kind that take root inside broken hearts. The drought didn't end overnight, but the house filled with warmth again. The children grew stronger, the fields greener. Months later, as the harvest sun turned gold across the land, Caleb stood by Eliza in the doorway, the smell of bread baking filling the air. Mary tugged at her mother's hand and asked, "Mama, are we home now?" Eliza looked at Caleb, who nodded softly, and she whispered, "Yes, baby. We're home." Then she turned to the man who had once given her bread when he had nothing else to give, and now, everything that mattered, and said quietly, "I'll take that last name now, if you're still offering." He smiled, the kind of smile that could heal. Always was. The land that had once been barren bloomed again, not because the rain returned, but because love did, and sometimes, that's all it takes, one act of kindness, one piece of bread, one name, to turn hunger into hope and strangers into family.